that? It's blocking out the sun.
Ah! Ah!
This isn't just a signal, it's a countdown.
No peace, only survival. Welcome to the nightmare. July 2nd began like any other day on Earth, quiet and unassuming. But in space, something ancient was waking up. A massive shadow drifted silently across the moon's surface, blotting out stars and casting darkness over the exact site where Apollo 11 once touched down. The lander and American flag stood as symbols of human achievement until they began to shake. Violent tremors rolled across the lunar surface, erasing the footprints of the astronauts who once walked there. Dust swirled and then nothing. Silence. The flag still stood, but the past had been swept clean. Back on Earth, thousands of miles away in New Mexico, a young intern working the night shift at SETI jolted upright. The screen in front of him was pulsing with a strange signal, something rhythmic, unnatural, and strong. He rubbed his eyes, unsure if it was real, but it kept pulsing. Heart pounding, he rushed to wake his supervisor, dragging him back to the monitors. The older man narrowed his eyes at the screen. This wasn't static. It was intelligent. He ordered a full trace, and within moments, the source was locked in. But the result made no sense. The signal wasn't coming from deep space. It was coming from the moon. At the Pentagon, General Williams stared at a radar image frozen on a massive object approaching Earth. It was unlike anything they had seen before, spanning a quarter of the moon's size and moving on a deceleration vector. He asked the question out loud. Was it an asteroid? A long pause followed before someone quietly said, "No, asteroids don't slow down." Across Washington, President Thomas Whitmore was asleep in the White House residence when the phone rang. It was early, but his instincts told him this wasn't about polling numbers. His wife Marilyn answered first, then handed the phone to him, her expression already tense. After a brief exchange, he sat upright in bed. Whatever he'd just been told stripped the fatigue from his face. Thomas Whitmore was a former Air Force pilot, but nothing in his military or political life had prepared him for this. Minutes later, the White House Communications Director Connie entered the Oval Office with updates. The media was hammering Whitmore for being too young, too soft, and the public was starting to question his leadership. But none of that mattered now. Another call came in, this time from the Secretary of Defense, and it wiped the smirk off even Nimziki's face. Around the world, strange malfunctions began popping up. Communication blackouts, broadcast interruptions. In New York City, David Levinson, a systems analyst and environmentalist working at a cable company, was playing chess with his father, Julius. Mid-game, David scolded him for using plastic cups again, a small but constant disagreement. Julius countered by pointing out that David still wore his wedding ring, despite being divorced for 3 years. Their usual bickering paused when David got a call from work. There was a major satellite issue affecting broadcasts. When he got to the office, he quickly saw the problem wasn't local. Their satellites weren't responding, not just the usual few, but all of them, as if they weren't even there. Meanwhile, in a small town, former pilot and crop duster Russell Case was once again screwing up. His son, Miguel, yelled at him for spraying the wrong field. The townspeople mocked him again. They laughed at his alien abduction stories, wrote him off as a drunk. Russell had given up trying to convince anyone, but he knew something was coming. Then the sky broke open. From the dark beyond Earth's orbit, massive saucer-shaped ships began detaching from the mothership and descending toward the planet. The U.S. military, now fully aware of the threat, scrambled for answers. Satellites failed, radar systems flickered. Panic was growing, and the reports were flooding in. The ships were each 15 miles wide and heading straight for major global cities: New York, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, Tokyo, London, Paris. It wasn't random. It was coordinated. In D.C., Whitmore gathered his team. General Williams explained the scale. Connie tried to manage media fallout. Nimziki pushed for an evacuation of the White House, but Whitmore refused. "If I run now," he said, "I add to the panic." In New York, David continued analyzing the signal that had baffled SETI. It was embedded in a satellite. He began noticing something strange. The pattern was diminishing, slowly but steadily. It wasn't just a signal. It was a countdown. In the skies above the deserts of New Mexico, the alien saucers loomed closer. The moon was no longer just a monument of history. It had become a waypoint. Earth's past had been visited. Its present was under surveillance, and its future was no longer in its own hands. The shadow over Earth had arrived. Massive alien ships now hovered above every major city, dark, silent, unmoving. The world held its breath. In New York, David Levinson sat at his workstation, reanalyzing the same alien signal first detected by SETI. The pattern was still there, pulsing through Earth's satellite network. But now, David could see the truth buried inside it. A hidden countdown. Each cycle ticked away a piece of time. In less than 7 hours, it would reach zero. David bolted into his boss's office and tried to explain. The signal wasn't random interference. It was a synchronized transmission sent through Earth's own satellites, guiding the ships like a GPS system. His boss brushed him off, too overwhelmed to listen. David didn't waste time. He called Connie, his ex-wife, now the president's communications director. He tried to tell her what he'd found, but she dismissed it as just another theory. Undeterred, David packed his gear, grabbed his father Julius, and began driving to Washington. In Los Angeles, Stephen Hiller, an off-duty Air Force pilot, slept through the morning with Jasmine, his girlfriend, and her son, Dylan. Dylan tried to wake them up. Something huge was hanging in the sky. They thought it was an earthquake and went back to sleep. When Stephen finally stepped outside and saw the monstrous saucer above the city, reality set in. The sky wasn't shaking. It was being blocked. Across the country, chaos bloomed. Traffic choked the roads as people tried to flee the cities. Grocery stores were looted, and news networks ran non-stop footage of the looming ships. Fear turned to hysteria. In the desert, Russell Case, still the local laughingstock, shouted to reporters that the aliens were the same ones who had abducted him years ago. No one listened until one of the ships appeared directly overhead. The look on Russell's face said it all. He remembered. Back in Washington, President Whitmore prepared to address the nation. His advisors pushed for evacuation, but he knew mass panic would follow. Instead, he stood before the country and urged calm. "Stay in your homes. Remain indoors. We are working on a solution," he said. But his voice couldn't mask the dread creeping into every word. David and Julius arrived in D.C. and were let into the White House, thanks to Connie. Begrudgingly, she brought David to the president. Inside the briefing room, David explained what he'd discovered. The aliens were using Earth satellites against them, coordinating a global strike. The countdown wasn't a coincidence, it was a schedule. He showed the president the clock. Time was nearly up. Simultaneously, the military launched a desperate attempt to communicate. A helicopter fitted with a visual message array hovered near one of the saucers. The response was immediate. A powerful beam struck the helicopter out of the sky, obliterating it. There was no misreading this message. Peace was not an option. President Whitmore gave the order to evacuate major cities. The staff scrambled to secure transportation. Air Force One was prepped. David and Julius were ushered aboard with the rest of the emergency personnel. The president would evacuate too, though reluctantly. In Los Angeles, Marilyn Whitmore, the First Lady, boarded a helicopter as Jasmine and Dylan were stuck in traffic beneath the hovering death machine. Back in New York, David stared at the countdown clock on his laptop as it hit 0. At that precise moment, the saucers opened. From the center of each hovering city killer, a brilliant beam of light surged downward. Then the world turned to fire. Manhattan, D.C., L.A., and dozens of other cities were instantly annihilated. The blasts rippled through buildings, vaporizing entire blocks in seconds. Glass, steel, concrete. Nothing survived. The president's plane lifted off just ahead of the shockwave, the explosion swallowing the White House behind him. In a tunnel outside Los Angeles, Jasmine watched the city erupt in her rearview mirror. Flames chased her car as she grabbed Dylan and ran, her legs pounding the pavement. Spotting a locked maintenance door, she kicked it open with everything she had and pulled them both inside seconds before fire roared past the opening. On Air Force One, no one spoke. Outside the windows, plumes of smoke climbed into the atmosphere, blackening the sky. The president stared down at what used to be his capital and said nothing. David sat beside him, stunned. No victory in being right. The world was no longer on the brink. It had fallen. July 3rd dawned under a sky choked with smoke and silence. Cities had been flattened. Millions were dead. The United States, along with the rest of the world, had suffered a coordinated strike with no chance to respond. President Whitmore sat aboard Air Force One, staring through the window at the charred remnants of his country. The guilt sat heavy on his shoulders. He had waited too long to evacuate. He hadn't wanted to cause panic, but panic had come anyway, followed by devastation. In the streets of Los Angeles, Jasmine emerged from the maintenance tunnel with Dylan clinging to her. The sky was a dirty orange, the air thick with ash. She walked carefully through the ruins, stepping over debris, searching for survivors. She eventually found a broken-down truck, loaded it with whoever she could find, strangers, children, the wounded, and kept driving. Among those she rescued was the First Lady, Marilyn Whitmore, bruised and weak, but alive. Meanwhile, at an isolated desert base, a battered squadron was preparing to strike back. Stephen Hiller and his best friend Jimmy Wilder sat among the surviving pilots. Stephen had found a letter from NASA waiting for him. Another rejection. Becoming an astronaut had been his dream. Now he was fighting aliens in the ruins of his home city. Jimmy tried to lift his spirits and teased him about proposing to Jasmine. He pointed out the obvious. NASA would never let a stripper's boyfriend into space. Stephen brushed it off, but the sting was there. The squadron took off, flying over what used to be Los Angeles. Stephen scanned the ground, looking for Jasmine, but there was nothing but fire and dust. As they approached the saucer still hovering above the city, they launched missiles, direct hits, perfect formations. But the missiles exploded against an invisible shield. The alien craft didn't even flinch. The pilots realized they were up against tech they couldn't penetrate. Then the aliens struck back. Dozens of smaller alien fighters poured out of the mothership, fast and agile. They too were protected by shields. One by one, the human jets were picked off. There was no time to regroup, no way to match their maneuverability. Jimmy and Stephen tried to retreat, but Jimmy's jet took a direct hit. Stephen screamed into his radio, watching helplessly as his best friend's plane exploded mid-air. Fueled by rage, Stephen lured one of the alien fighters into a narrow canyon, cut his engines, and let it overshoot. As it approached, he deployed his parachute to blind its sensors. The alien craft smashed into the canyon wall and exploded. Stephen descended into the wreckage, limping through the dust. The alien inside emerged, and without hesitation, Stephen punched it square in the head, knocking it out cold. "Welcome to Earth," he muttered. In the sky, Air Force One carried the president's team toward what would become the center of the resistance. Inside, David Levinson heard the Joint Chiefs discussing nuclear options. Nimziki pushed for launching a full nuclear counterstrike, but David interrupted. He argued that nuking the alien ships wouldn't just risk global fallout, it probably wouldn't work. The shields were still up. Besides, if they destroyed the ships and contaminated the planet, what were they even saving? When the military dismissed David, his father Julius stepped in. He reminded everyone that David was the only reason they had any warning at all. Then he dropped a bomb of his own. The government had known about aliens for decades, ever since Roswell. Area 51 wasn't a myth. It was real. The room went silent. President Whitmore turned to Nimziki, who tried to deflect but finally admitted it was true. In the ruins of Los Angeles, Jasmine kept moving, helping survivors where she could. She had no idea Stephen was alive, and Stephen, dragging the unconscious alien behind him across the desert, had no idea where she was. But fate intervened. As he marched through the dust, a convoy of evacuees appeared, campers, civilians, refugees. Among them, Russell Case and his family. Stephen asked them if they knew of any military bases nearby. Russell said there weren't any, at least none that were on the map. But Stephen had seen something from the air, something hidden. Area 51. Back in the skies, Air Force One descended toward the base, buried deep in the Nevada desert. Whitmore demanded answers. He got them. Dr. Oken, the head of the facility, greeted them with wild hair and excitement in his eyes. He led them through winding corridors to a hangar that housed the crown jewel of conspiracy theories, a recovered alien ship from the Roswell crash. Okun showed them the craft, fully intact, and revealed the preserved bodies of 3 dead aliens. Frail, small, and biologically perishable, but technologically advanced far beyond anything Earth had. Okun explained that the aliens had no vocal cords. They communicated telepathically, and if they were back, it wasn't by accident. Just then, Stephen arrived at the base. He rolled in with the alien body strapped to the truck. The guards almost shot him on sight, but the alien corpse bought him access. He was ushered inside and reunited with President Whitmore and the others. He didn't have time to rest. The president had just learned that even more cities across the world had been destroyed. NATO bases gone. The military reduced to a shell of what it had been. Humanity was on its knees. Okun and his team began examining the alien body. As they prepped for dissection, something went wrong. The alien wasn't dead. It awoke. It killed the doctors in seconds, and then it took control of Dr. Okun, using him like a puppet, speaking through him. President Whitmore entered the lab just in time. He tried to negotiate, asked if peace was possible. The alien responded through Okun. No peace. Then it lashed out, telepathically attacking the president, flooding his mind with violent visions of world after world, consumed and left barren. Whitmore collapsed in agony. General Williams opened fire through the lab glass and killed the creature. As he recovered, Whitmore stood and addressed the others. He had seen everything. The aliens weren't here to conquer. They were here to consume. They were locusts, planet to planet, strip mining every resource before moving on. There was no negotiating, no surrender, only survival. He gave the order, launched the nukes. But time was running out, and there were no guarantees that nuclear fire would be enough. July 4th began not with celebration, but with ash falling from the sky. Inside a dark hangar at Area 51, David Levinson lay on the cold floor, half drunk and fully defeated. The world was crumbling, and the brilliant mind that once decoded the alien signal was now curled up beneath a desk, ready to give up. His father, Julius, found him like that, rumpled, silent, and lost. He kicked at David's foot. "Get up," Julius said. "You'll catch a cold." David blinked, and just like that, something shifted. The haze in his mind cleared. A cold, a virus. He shot up, mumbling ideas too fast for his father to follow. The signal, the alien code, it could carry more than messages. It could carry a virus, a computer virus, something small, undetectable, and designed to do one thing: disable their shields. By sunrise, the control room was alive again. David explained his plan to President Whitmore and the surviving staff. They would upload the virus directly into the alien mothership using the captured fighter, which Stephen Hiller had flown back from the desert. Once inside, the virus would bring down the shields across the globe. Humanity would have one window, one coordinated shot to strike back. Nimziki called it suicide. Who's even qualified to fly an alien ship? He snapped. Stephen raised a hand. I've seen how they move. I've taken one down. I'll get it in. Whitmore nodded slowly. Then we're doing this. The alien ship was prepped. David fine-tuned the virus. The engineers rigged the fighter with a nuclear payload. Jasmine arrived at the base with a convoy of survivors, including Marilyn Whitmore. But the joy of reunion was brief. Marilyn was fading. Internal injuries. Nothing could be done. Whitmore reached her bedside just in time. He held her hand as she whispered her last words. Then she was gone. That morning, 2 marriages were born in the shadow of death. Stephen and Jasmine were married in a makeshift ceremony on the base runway. David and Connie, once divorced, now standing beside each other, served as their witnesses. As they signed the papers, Connie looked down and noticed something. David still wore his wedding ring. She took his hand quietly and held it. Above them, the alien fighter was ready. David and Stephen suited up. Julius clapped his son on the shoulder and whispered something only he could hear. Connie pulled David in for one last hug. Jasmine kissed Stephen hard and told him to come back. The base loudspeakers crackled. President Whitmore stood before the assembled pilots, volunteers, soldiers, survivors. Many of them were not soldiers at all. They were farmers, instructors, old veterans, like Russell Case, who stood in the back with his son, helmet in hand. Whitmore stepped forward. We can't be consumed by fear. Not today. We will fight, he said. We will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight. We're going to live on. We're going to survive. Today, we celebrate our Independence Day. A thunder of cheers followed. It was more than speech. It was defiance. It was a promise. The alien ship lifted off the desert floor and vanished into the upper atmosphere. Inside, David clutched his laptop as Stephen guided the ship toward the mothership, now orbiting Earth like a god watching ants. They docked with ease, unnoticed. David launched the virus and waited. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the virus spread. Down on Earth, President Whitmore climbed into a jet himself. He was done watching. He wanted to fight. Fighter squadrons from all over the world received the same signal. Shields down. The first missiles launched. The first alien saucer was hit and damaged. Across the world, the battle began. In the air above the Nevada desert, Whitmore dodged alien fire, calling out targets and directing squadrons. For the first time in days, the aliens bled, but the human forces were low on ammunition and time was running out. The saucer over the base began charging its primary weapon. On the ground, Russell Case sat in his cockpit. His last missile jammed. He looked at the photo of his kids taped to the dash. "Tell my children, I love them," he said over the radio. Then he pulled back on the stick and aimed his plane straight into the weapon's core. His jet pierced the beam just as it fired. A white explosion lit up the sky. The saucer exploded in a shockwave of fire and metal. Cheers erupted in the control room. They now knew how to bring the others down. Word spread across the globe, disable the shields, hit the weapon. But inside the mothership, David and Stephen had a problem. The ship had clamped down. They were trapped. The nuke was armed, the timer ticking. "No way we're getting out," David said. Stephen looked back at him. "We're not dying today." As the final seconds ticked down, the alien control room exploded behind them. The clamps released. Stephen punched the throttle. The ship rocketed away. 10 seconds later, the nuke detonated. From Earth, everyone watched the sky as the alien mothership cracked apart in a blinding bloom of light. One by one, the saucers over every city fell, crashing to Earth in flames. In the desert, Whitmore landed and rushed to his daughter. Jasmine stood with Dylan. Connie clutched Julius's hand. Over the horizon, 2 figures appeared, walking through the smoke, Stephen and David, covered in dust but smiling like lunatics. They were home. Cheers broke out. The world was still broken, but not defeated. Thomas Whitmore wrapped his arms around his daughter. She looked up at the sky and smiled. "Happy 4th of July, Daddy." And somewhere above them, for the first time in days, the sky was quiet.